Hello, students. In part one of this World War II presentation, I'm going to talk to you about the Axis and Allied leaders of the war. Now, we already talked about the causes that led up to World War II. We talked about a worldwide depression, massive unemployment, the rise of fascism, the problems with the Versailles Treaty, and high inflation and the high war debt owed by Germany because of the Treaty of Versailles. And on this page right here, this is a quick review of the leaders of fascist countries, the Axis powers. The word fascist means it's a political belief that absolute power should be given to a dictator. The dictator has unrelenting control. You don't have many basic rights and freedoms like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to petition the government. In many cases, you can't worship the God of your choice, which means you don't have freedom of religion. And a lot of times in a fascist country, racism, nationalism, and discrimination are emphasized. And that was the case in Germany the most. So on this page, you have leaders of the fascist countries, the Axis powers. You have Hideki Tojo, who was the military leader of Japan. And Japan has an emperor, or had an emperor at the time, named Hirohito. And he gave a lot of military power and control of the government in Japan to Hideki Tojo. They were the main aggressor in the Pacific during World War II. Then you have Benito Mussolini, who is known as El Duce, who was the fascist leader of Italy at the time. And the country of Italy had colonies and a lot of control in places in North Africa during World War II and before that time. The most familiar fascist leader that everybody mostly knows is Adolf Hitler, and they refer to him as Der Fuhrer, or the leader in German. And he was the fascist leader of Germany during World War II. And he rose to power because he was able to persuade the German people that the Allied powers during World War I were the cause of all the economic turmoil in Germany. And he convinced people in a book that the Jewish people were also to blame for the problems in Germany. And as we learned earlier, the Versailles Treaty made Germany weakened, and it placed the blame on Germany for World War I. Germany were demilitarized down to 100,000 soldiers. A lot of their territories were stripped away. A lot of their colonies were stripped away. They had to pay $33 billion in war debt, which Hitler said, we don't have time for that. We're not going to pay for that. So when things are bad in the country, people turn to a charismatic leader to make things better, make their country great again. And they turn to Hitler in Germany to make things better in Germany again, a stronger military, a stronger economy. Japan had a lot of economic problems as well, and they attacked China and Manchuria and took over Korea and took over the islands in the Pacific like the Philippines, which we talked about during the Spanish-American War. And Italy wanted more land and resources from the Versailles Treaty, and they didn't get it. So 20 years after World War I, they had a lot of political upheaval and political turmoil, and they turned to Mussolini to be the leader of Italy. On this page, it talks about the major Allied powers. The Allied powers were, and from our perspective, the good guys during World War II. And I have flags on here. You have the American flag right here. You have France, Great Britain, their flag is called the Union Jack. In Canada, and the Soviet Union. So they were the major Allied powers during World War II. And that doesn't mean that they're the only Allied powers, but they were the top dogs. They're the most powerful countries for the Allied side. This page right here talks about the difference between the democratic countries and communist countries, and it's a repeat of the Allied countries. And it says democratic countries, it's a country where the people rule and basic human rights are protected. So in a democracy, we vote for our leaders, and anybody, ordinary citizens, can have a say-so in their government. The Allied countries that were democratic were United States, Canada, France, and Great Britain. The major Allied country that was not democratic, they were communist, was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union joined the Allied powers after being invaded by Germany. So at one time, the Soviet Union were allies with Germany. So Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact that said that they'll come to each other's aid economically and militarily if needed. But Germany turned their back on the Soviet Union and invaded them in the 1940s. And so the Soviet Union said, we don't have time for that. We're going to join the Allied side. We're not friends anymore. We're not allies. Communism is a system of government where the government controls the basic means of production and limits and restricts basic human rights. It's more like an economic system. It's where the government controls and decides the goods and services that are made in the country. They control the businesses, and they control most of your profits. So that's what communism is. On this page, it says major Allied leaders during World War II. The United States had two major leaders or presidents, Franklin Roosevelt, who served for 12 years as president. He died near the end of the war, and he was succeeded by Harry S. Truman, who was known for dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, which brought World War II to an end. And over to the right of them is Joseph Stalin, who's a dictator and leader of the Soviet Union. And there's a city, or there was a city named Stalingrad that was a major battle site during the war. Below, you have Charles de Gaulle, who was the leader of France during World War II. France was conquered and occupied by Germany at the time, but Charles de Gaulle led a resistance in pushing back Adolf Hitler. Next is Winston Churchill. He was the prime minister and leader of Great Britain, and he was known for the victory sign. And a minor Allied leader is Mackenzie King, who is the premier or prime minister of Canada during World War II. Here is an activity you can do on your own. It's not required that you do it. So you have to write a Who Am I poem on one of these World War II leaders. You can use the textbook pages that are on this page to gather information. And it says you're to start each statement with I, and at the end you're going to write Who Am I. So you can use these page numbers in your book to gather information and make a Who Am I poem. And I can show you in class how to write one. This page talks about foreign policy of the United States from isolationism to involvement. It says gradual change in American policy from neutrality to direct involvement. And that word neutrality means the same thing as isolationism. Which means you don't take a side. You don't take a side. You don't intervene in foreign affairs with other countries. You're concerned about domestic issues or things that are going on at home. And the United States didn't want to get involved at first because, number one, it says isolationism, because of the Great Depression and the legacy of World War I. The U.S. didn't join the League of Nations. So America had problems at home at the beginning of the war. We had massive unemployment. We had lack of jobs. We had banks that need to be stabilized. People were hungry, homeless. So we had problems before we got involved in World War II. Number two, it says economic aid to allies. That's the second step. So we had something called the Lend-Lease Act that was passed by Congress in 1941 to allow the president to loan $7 billion worth of weapons and supplies to Great Britain. So there again, Great Britain is our BFF. Even though we weren't directly involved in the war, we provided weapons and supplies like naval ships, guns, machine guns, cannons, tanks, planes, submarines, food. So we're providing anything economically to help our allies push back Hitler, because Hitler was on a mad range. Then, direct involvement in the war with the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese on December 7th, 1941, and that propelled the U.S. into World War II. So, in order, we were isolated, we were neutral, we provided money and economic aid and war supplies, and boom, direct involvement. Oops, let me fix that. Direct involvement. We went to war with Japan, which you know is an ally or was an ally of Germany and Italy. All right, we'll skip this page for now. Here's a map exercise you have to do. It says use page 473 as a reference. You are to label in color the major Axis countries. Label in color the Allied powers. Label in color the neutral countries. Shade the countries that are controlled by the Axis powers: France, Norway, Poland, Netherlands, Denmark, and any other country under Axis control. Again, you can use page 473 in your textbook to help you with this. Here's another map of Europe during 1945. Here's some questions that you need to answer based on the previous map that I showed you. It reads, list the countries that were neutral during World War II. 2. In what country did the Normandy landing occur? 3. The Battle of the Bulge happened in what country? 4. What Allied power or country controlled land in Africa? 5. Germany, Poland, Sweden, and Finland border around what sea? 6. How many major battle sites do you see? So you need to go through and look at the map again to answer these questions 1 through 6. I'm going to pause it right here and stop. This is the end of part 1. Thanks for listening.